Round 2, Crash Bandicoot vs. Spyro the Dragon. Finally, in Universal Studios, Naughty Dog and Insomniac Games made it to success and finally made games that will fully recognize them as the creators. In the 90s, video game mascots was a huge thing in video games, and the PlayStation went to Universal Studios to see if they could use one of their characters as the image of the console to compete with Nintendo's Mario and Sega's Sonic. But since Naughty Dog came first, in 1996 they released their first Sony PlayStation game, Crash Bandicoot. Then on 1998, Insomniac made it to the scene where they could make a video game mascot for the Sony PlayStation. That game was Spyro the Dragon. But it was a little too late because that year Crash was releasing his third game of the series, but we'll get to that later. But first let's begin comparing and contrast. Crash Bandicoot became the mascot for Sony, but gameplay wise it is not as epic of a masterpiece as Mario 64, which was released at the same year. Crash Bandicoot was a linear 3D platformer that its main object is to get from point A to point B with no other direction to go but to follow the path that leads him to a lot of dangerous obstacles. If you ask me, this game kinda reminds me a lot of Donkey Kong Country because of the jungle feel. Like Donkey Kong, where he collects bananas to gain a life, Crash collects peaches, or some fruit rather, where it's easy to gain a life like DKC. You can find them anywhere. Lines of them, crates, and more crates. In this game, you only have 1 health, so anything that hits you, you automatically die. But you can get an extra hit point if you find a Haku Aku in one of those boxes, a witch doctor mask that will later become a big role in the series. If you collect 3 Aku Aku, you'll turn invincible for a short period of time. You have a couple of moves. For one, jump and the spin attack. The game's story follows Crash's effort to stop his creator's plan from world domination, clean up any pollution that are used to save his girlfriend Tauna, a female bandicoot that is evolved by Dr. Cortex and Nitrous Brio. On the other side, Spyro the Dragon is a very different platformer game. Instead of a linear world, you have a bigger space and choice of levels as you want. Each level has a home world that becomes more difficult than the last as you go. Sometimes for a bonus level, you can end up in a flight level where you have to complete certain numbers of obstacles, such as planes to blow up and rings to fly through. Unlike Crash, this game has collectibles that are very important in the game. Gems, dragon eggs, and freeing dragons trapped in statues caused by the evil Nasty North, after he heard the dragons insulting him on the documentary style video. Okay, these two platform games are very different. The story for Crash Bandicoot was like something out of Frankenstein, where the creator loses control out of his creation. Spyro's story was just like something happened to his kind and he has to rescue all of them. If you ask me what similarities that these games both have, it would have to be the forgettable story, so let's look in depth with the gameplay. Crash Bandicoot is a simple linear platformer, and on the other hand, Spyro is an open world 3D environment that does not force you to follow the direction that the programmers tell you. But since you have a lot of things to collect, a situation like this will only make you spend a lot of time searching hard for the stuff that you missed, despite having more of an adventure than Crash Bandicoots. But since Crash Bandicoot is a linear world, the programmers offers new challenge and a lot of dangers that will keep the excitement of playing some of the levels. So even though that there are a lack of freely exploring, there are a lot more obstacles to face, providing new challenge. Instead of having 1 health, Spyro has Sparks the dragonfly that follows him around and changes his color depending on how many hit points Spyro has. He can glide, charge like a bull, and breathe fire. And Crash is just old news. Crash can just die at any moment, and Spyro has chances. But yet, collecting lives are pretty tough to find, and in Crash, it was just simple to earn. Since Crash and Spyro's gameplay has their pros and cons, let's look at the boss fights. Both of them have pretty easy and pretty lazy design and forgettable boss fights. The only difference is that Crash's bosses are more threatening and Spyro's are just lazy and easy. Just out of topic, I just want to say, how could you not make a joke when a boss is called Blow Hard? Also, I really like battling Dr. Neo Cortex as the final boss than Nasty Nork because the fight with Nasty was more of a chase, which was a huge disappointment. The battle with Neo Cortex was more of a traditional boss fight that marks the spot. Next, let's get to the music. Crash's soundtrack fits in every level, nice to hear and fits the environment of the game very nicely. For Spyro's soundtrack, I have to say that the only songs I liked that were the opening screen and the first 3 levels. Continuing on the game, I thought they were okay, but the one that I find completely uninspiring has to be the music from the second homeworld. I thought it was a dumb soundtrack. I thought Crash's soundtrack was more catchy and memorable than Spyro's. Now let's look at the designs of these games. Crash Bandicoot does have a jungle theme, but back in 1996 it almost had better graphics than the Mario 64, keyword being almost. Looking at Spyro's graphics, it's nothing to brag about. It was okay when it was 1998, but we had graphics much better than this. Sure, the designs and surfaces and textures were pretty decent, but the biggest disappointment is the enemies and the characters' level designs. Seriously, Crash's enemies are more superior than this. Whoa, wait a minute, is he sticking his ass at me? But anyway, the graphics for Crash was pretty nice to look at because of the shadowing and the dark effects, and for Spyro, it's not the worst one ever, but it is inferior. If I can find any bad parts about the game, I would have to say Crash did have some obstacles that were frustrating, but I can't name or remember one right now, but they were pretty easy to get by fast. But I do criticize for having occasionally sluggish controls and being challenging at times. It does have poor voice acting, but Spyro's voice acting is worse. The parts that I really hate was to listen to one of those dragons when you rescue them. They always have to lecture you or just say nothing but, "Thank you for releasing me." Many times I just skip, but for the ones that you skip, sometimes you'll miss a secret or something important which is very unpredictable, so it's a hit or miss. But if I can find a problem I have with both of those games, I would have to say that they are lacking gameplay wow factor. So in deciding which game is better, I have to say Crash Bandicoot, mainly because it was more exciting, challenging, and fast paced. Spyro to me is a boring collecting game in comparison. I do admit that the beginning of the game was a great and a magical feel, but later on in the game I realized that there was so much more that Insomniac could improve. I do question anybody who says the first Spyro game was the best, when you should see the mediocrities that this game has. To be honest, I'd rather go play Crash running away from a giant boulder than just collecting gems and fight against poor designed enemies that just waits for you to get close enough to hurt you. Besides, Crash is more of a mascot than Spyro himself, in my opinion. So my score for Crash Bandicoot is a below average 3 fingers out of 5, and Spyro the Dragon above average 2 fingers out of 5. So the winner of this round, Naughty Dog. I'm sorry for disappointing a lot of you fans because of my low score, but trust me, it gets better. Now we have a tie, so please stay tuned for the next round when I decide which sequel is better than the other and gets ahead of the competition.